everybody. Welcome to In Our Community. This is Marc Isaac Potter. I'm doing a series of shows in which I'm reading my poetry. So I wanted you to know that. I'm going to move the screen a little bit, just a little bit. It's probably about right there. Okay. See, I'm doing this at home on Zoom. I'm going to read from a manuscript called Audio Visual. And I read some the other day, but I'm going to read some again. Yeah, so let me start. I might read over the pieces I already read because I think they'll be smoother. So this piece is called Bananas. A young girl walks slowly across the dirty red sand of this forgotten beach. She is supposed to meet a boy here for whom she has feelings, a boy who professes to have feelings for her as well. Minutes pass, then more minutes pass by. Cockatoos chatter in their tropically odd way. There is no telling what they have to say. A breeze rises across the water, coming onto the beach to lift a few of the lighter pieces of garbage from the sand. For example, tissues and a man's stylish handkerchief, such as you would see in the breast pocket of an evening jacket. This makes her think of prom night. Will he also stand me up on prom night, she thinks? Having watched her father, as many times as eternity, look lovingly in her mother's eyes and say, I'm sorry, my dearest, it will never happen again. The girl glances at the bananas on the trees. Some are green, some are greenish yellow, some are yellow ripe. Thank you very much. I like that poem a lot. I'm going to lean over sometimes and get my drink whose name you're not supposed to see. And I'm looking at our clock. So I'm going to look this way sometimes to the clock. That's good. That tastes good. Okay, that's about enough for that poem. I'm going to read you another poem. This one is funny. I read it the other day too, but I'm going to read it again because different people watch different shows. Poem, Centipede. A centipede is arguing furiously about his speeding ticket. Having carefully forgotten about the rolling stop, he committed 2 stop signs back. But no one is fooled. Neither the officer, a tall blonde woman with a weathered face, nor her young trainee, a kid so green he still remembers what they had for lunch at the academy on Thursdays. Sometimes there is very little room for expansive compassion, and thus, in an act of tough love, she throws the book at him. Unfortunately, this book, the California Vehicle Code, inordinately heavy, slips, squashing the centipede into a paper-thin paste, a paste for which no one has yet to find a resourceful use. There you go. Okay. Now here's one called Snakes and Horses. This one's harder to read for some reason. I don't know why. It's a poem. It's kind of written like a prose poem in a way. Sawing through the long snake of bread, a thin small knife entirely inadequate, I see the tiny serrated teeth doing their very best. My cutting board is Beyond Thinking by Zen Master Dogen. That's a book, Beyond Thinking by Zen Master Dogen. Who knows the extent of my unspeakability? Stumbling as I did, Mr. Ed, the horse, of course, is standing in his stable. The prop man comes in and puts peanut butter in his mouth. And Mr. Ed, in a vain attempt to extricate the goo from the roof of his mouth, does just what the manipulators want him to do. He appears to be speaking. And that's based on a true story. There was a TV character, which was a horse named Mr. Ed. And they did that. They put peanut butter on the roof of his mouth so that he would have to try to lick it off and he would look like he was speaking. That's a true story. Okay, the next poem I did not read the other day, but I thought I should give this piece a chance. It's called A Note to a Friend, Sports Announcer. I hope our conversation the other day was long enough. Sometimes whole clauses get left out. A Minnesota blizzard on the football field affects me as I turn precisely at the hips from the radio. The two iron and steel rasps that sit in my lumbago and rub together when I say too many verbs or when the adverbs are having difficulty modifying other adverbs. So that's about an aging sports announcer who has had some hip replacement apparently, and it's not going well. There used to be not such a thing as hip replacements at all, and nowadays they do them a lot better, but there was a time when they did them with steel. I think they may still do some with steel. I don't know, or metal, I should say. Let me read this one again. Poem, Note to a Friend, Sports Announcer. I hope our conversation the other day was long enough. Sometimes whole clauses get left out. A Minnesota blizzard on the football field affects me as I turn precisely at the hips from the radio. The two iron and steel rasps that sit in my lumbago and rub together when I say too many verbs or when the adverbs are having difficulty modifying other adverbs. Thank you very much. This piece is rather long. It's called Train Wreck. And I think I'm going to go slower than I did the other day. I'm going to make some corrections along the way here. Okay, I'm going to go slower. It's called Train Wreck, and it's more about the flowers along the side of the tracks than it is about the train wreck that's on the tracks. There is a train wreck on the tracks, but the attention of the piece of the short fiction is the flowers, the stems and the blossoms and the leaves and all the rest of it. So I'm giving you kind of a heads up here. Regarding the train, the flowers along the side of the track were particularly beautiful and unusually abundant. The stem of the flowers seemed more like a support mechanism on which the tiny flowers sat. The tiny flowers were an interesting multicolored yellow, 5 petals each flower, a rather bright yellow out near the tip of each petal, not fading but lessening as the petal made its way back to the stem. And I've got something to fix here. Okay. At the center of the flower, half of a sphere of the most tiny white balls, rather than having the little concave spots that a golf ball might have. These little, most tiny balls on the flowers had instead convex spots, which made the blossoming pop even more. The physical plant was a very homogeneous green, as though all the plants were in some sort of agreement. And the plants, though rather tall and ever so thick, so very thick that one could not make their way through them without quite a great effort indeed, these plants were actually very soft and pliable and thin. That is to say, the leaves, while large, were thin, and the stems of the plants, while tall, were extraordinarily thin. So there's kind of a contradiction. He's saying they're very thin, but also that they're hard to go through. And the plants in no way looked odd, even though anatomically, of course, they were indeed odd. No, they looked both interesting, as I have described, but also interested as they sat at a bevel to the railroad tracks as though they were the perfect stadium audience. The green being like bleachers, of course, slanting constantly upward, away from the playing field, if you will, of the railroad tracks, and the yellow flowers being like people. And I'm making some editorial changes while we go through here. Looking upon the wreckage of the train down the tracks with its odd blossoming of its own. So he's saying the train wreck is blossoming in a way, in a manner of speaking, too. You know, these things, once they happen, there's people crawling out and other people come to see what's going on, that kind of thing. That's the end of that poem. Or I should say that's the end of that story. Okay, so I'm going to do another story. Pretty sure. This one's called Eyes. I think I did read it the other day, but I'm going to read it again. I just want to get a better reading in case the post production people deem the other one not very good. Short fiction, Eyes. And this one is about something. This one is about an old man, and a friend of his comes into his apartment, comes into the old man's apartment, and tries to clean it up a little bit because the landlord has said he's got to clean up his mess. That's what's going on. And then toward the end, the friend who's been cleaning up the apartment goes and speaks to the landlord. So that's what's happening here. That should help you understand it. It was not a metaphor. I really did open my eyes by sliding my eyelids back into my head. The eyelids, coated in nondescript pale skin and nearly invisible eyelashes. There was no applause from an adoring crowd, just me, myself, sitting in a somewhat uncomfortable wooden chair, not a chair that barked asceticism, and neither was what I saw then important, such that anyone else would raise their eyebrows in surprise. I saw a hopelessly small closet and its makeshift door, begging the clothes that lay in a heap on the floor for some kind of mercy or understanding. I saw black pants hanging upside down from the bookshelf above, all the books having been sold for food or writing materials. The bookshelf now acting as a handler of clothes, especially to dry the clothing that sometimes soak in the sink, the kitchen sink. These conditions and practices were never to be revealed until after his death. The smell was atrocious, of course. The smell was atrocious, of course. A forgotten saucepan here, an elected item of trash, having been left on the counter as some sort of companion. If you want a metaphor, then I was he, and he, of course, was gone, having inexplicably left me alone in his apartment. I had told him I would clean up a bit, you see, and that is the explanation if you need one, or desire one. He could not bear to watch his things being cleaned, nor his things being put in any order whatsoever, neither my eyelids opening. He did not like particularly watching his favorite black pants, the ones threadbare at the bottom from having been black pants for so long. And so my eyes did open. There is nothing else to report. A stray termite here and there looking for a community, an odd old 78 LP. Oh, of course. This happened yesterday, too. All right. It's an alarm of some kind. Sorry about that. Let's go back a little bit. I'm making a couple of editorial changes. And so my eyes did open. There is nothing else to report. A stray termite here or there looking for a community, an old 78 LP leaning up against a 1970s boombox player, or a Walkman, or some other hopelessly mismatched couple from a strangled past. Some alleyways that I have taken for a home looked more organized than this. He asked me to make sure not to clean too much, just enough to obey the recent edict of the landlord. See, there is an explanation for everything. So I pretended that all items were snowflakes and I picked them up in hazardous groups and threw them to the ceiling, the highest of cathedral ceilings, and watched them fall again. Then I went downstairs to his landlord, and gave him, the landlord, $352. Leave him alone, I said. He is an old man with very little time to live. Thank you. I was in somewhat of a situation like this. I had an apartment that I just didn't keep very good track of, and uh, the landlord was wanting me to clean it, and I did actually clean it, but I would have liked to have had help, you know. Anyway, all right. So I have a real small poem here that's so small I kind of hesitate to even read it. It's very few lines. It's called Chickadee and Boot. Lanky, worn trucker sends puffs of cigarette smoke into the ice cold air. Brown gray chickadee pecks in the snow next to his boot. Okay, now the next piece, I don't know that we're going to have time for it. I hope we do. It's a very happy piece. I suppose I should try to read it. It's been read before on the show, but it's been years since it's been read, so I'm trying to clean up some editorial changes here. I'm going to try to read this. We've got 11 minutes or so. No, 10 minutes now, 9 minutes. A galaxy of children. Perhaps I can honestly call this a galaxy. Granted, it is not a galaxy of stars or movie stars. I mean, it is not actually astrology or astronomy, but it is 9-year-old kids doing Romeo and Juliet on their own, the school play having been canceled. Meet Karen Wentworth and Troy Lee. I don't know jack about Romeo and Juliet story. All I know is it is a couple of kids from families that hate each other fall in love. The pressure and depression for each of them is overbearing. But remember, we are witnessing the acting skill of two kids entirely, irrevocably on their own, Karen and Troy. At first, they're playing all the parts themselves. Troy stands in a 55-gallon drum as he plays the part of Romeo's father. Then little Rufus, in a wheelchair since forever, offers to play the part of the father. It was so beautiful to watch the other kids in the crowd because of Rufus's bravery get the actor's bug, swallow the spark of possibility. Soon the audience was nearly all bare. All the children were now part of the play. Then what might very well have been a terrible thing, should have been a terrible thing, a nasty pouring of rain turned out to be some angel's stroke of genius. They moved the whole show to Coach Billy's basement. And from there, the word spread throughout the neighborhood. Within an hour, teachers and parents from other parts of the district were over at Coach Billy's to watch the children perform their play. Coach Billy served bologna sandwiches and Kool-Aid for the kids. and for the parents' ice cold beer. At the end of the story, Romeo and Juliet are supposed to die or something, but not these kids. They all hugged in a circle. I like that. It's a very happy story. It's happy all the way through. Yep, that was very good. And it only took about 3 minutes. This piece is very long, and I don't want to try to read it with my time that's left. This next piece is called Grass, Sand, Grass. It's rather surreal. It'll leave you wondering, so I better skip that piece right now and try to go to something smaller. Yeah, this is huge. And that's huge. Let's try to read this piece. This is a poem called Sweater rather, and it's about a sweater that a family owns that they pass down from generation to generation. And as they pass it down, it changes colors. And I don't know if any alarms are going to go off, but sweater. I walk apparently, this off blue sweater well worn on my right shoulder, green perhaps, or blue green. Uncle Ted wore the same sweater years before, and when he wore it, part two, I nonetheless walked on the sidewalk of an intricately busy street that it is, he repeated, an intricately busy street, repeated just as the sweater repeated its creepy trip off the hump of the shoulder down onto the arm. And Aunt Bertha, when she wore the sweater, it was a reddish blue, although one does not really think there is such a thing as reddish blue. And little Teddy Jr., when he wore it, the sweater, it seemed more a light blue, perhaps even a teal. Or I walked down a rural road, weeds on each side like a wild version of Timothy Hay. We would come along, we kids, and pick up the wild hay and take it home to our pony named Lightning. There is no sense of renewal. Even though the wild hay grows every spring, the pony tries to buck us off every chance he gets, and the chicken hawks never stop targeting our tiny asymmetrical chicken coop. Rather, there's a sense of loss, not just that this way of life is fading into a surprisingly distant past. President Kennedy is dead. What more can they do to us? Oh, was I naive. Now, almost 50 years later, the sweater wants to just fall. Now, almost 50 years later, the sweater wants to just fall to the tiny gravel at the side of the road, and I let it. A backhoe has long ago dug the pony's grave, and more good people have been slain than I can count. The sickness in my gut is sour Kool-Aid as children sing hymns of renewal, hymns which they do not understand, let alone believe. According to Sensei, that's a Zen teacher, according to Sensei, Buddha lightly touched the earth with his fingertips. The earth, he said, is my witness. And so it was. That sweater now certainly belongs to the earth. The soles of my shoes have always belonged to the earth. The Timothy Hay lays on its side, looking up out of the corner of one eye, asking, are you going to take us home this spring? No, I say, ever so gently, not this year. Lightning is dead. I was very happy to read that for you. Okay, we're almost done. So I'm going to tell you some things about the TV station that I have this show at. It's called KMVT, MV for Mountain View, KMVT. And the website is www.kmvt15.org. So I'm looking over at the time. That's what I do. I look that way. It's not much else I want to say. I would encourage you to come to KMVT, look up their website, look up their address, look up their phone number, come over there and check it out. or call is even better. And you can take some classes and actually start your own TV show for real. It's very fun to do. Really, really, really. So that's everything I have for you guys. Thank you for listening. Again, this has been Marc Isaac Potter for the TV show called In Our Community. So thanks again.